Joining me on Startup Report today is Scott Price, the founder and now CEO of A-LIGN.
Thanks a lot for having me, Joe.
Welcome. So I guess first, I would say you have the largest seed round of anybody that I've ever talked to at $55 million for your very first round, or 54. Congratulations on that.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Very, very impressive. But there was action before that happened. So let's go back and look at, quickly, if you don't mind, the start of the company and then what led you up to your first attempt at raising.
So I started the company in 2009. Great time to start a company in the downturn of the economy. The good thing is if your company's focus is we provide great service at a cheaper price with a high degree of quality. So that resonated with buyers back in the 2009 as we were in the recession. Started the company out really focusing on broadening. I could see the security services were coming. And so we initially started as a CPA firm doing the information technology auditing. And I could see it broadening into this privacy space. HIPAA was starting to come into the forefront, even though it had been a law already, and then grew the organization really to a broader group of services that our clients were facing. Tampa Bay area, mid-market, you had a lot of people that maybe had been displaced out of the recession. So you had startups, 2-3 people. The cloud was starting to come around. So maybe they outsourced pieces of their infrastructure and they were going after larger companies now to do business with because maybe they were executives that were laid off at a large company. And so our organization starting out as well really mirrored well with our client base that we were having in the Tampa Bay area and growing the organization. And when we went through this process and as we were growing the company, the nice thing is we were a professional services firm. So we're not laying out cash to buy tractors and everything else. But when you hire people, they do want to get paid all the time and you got to keep them busy on a client basis. And as you think about as I always say, it's a train clearing the tracks. And my job is to clear the tracks and they were running through. Clearing the tracks costs money from a sales and marketing approach. And so we continue to see our growth eating up capital. So thank goodness we were making money so we could use that capital to reinvest in the business. As we were continuing to grow, we kept going head to head with some other firms around the country that did similar services. In 2015, 2016 timeframe, saw one of our major competitors take an equity investment from Carlyle. Carlyle Group being a huge PE firm. And we were growing at a greater rate. We were growing at 40, 50%. They only were growing at 20%. And I said, well, maybe I'll catch them. Well, they took a large equity investment and bought a $40 million company. It's sort of hard to keep up with that growth when someone can just write a check and buy a company. And so we looked at our national landscape and said, we need to do something. A lot of traditional banks in town and just in general loan off of your receivables that you have. So our receivables may be $2 million. They loan off half of that, 85% of it. So $1 million, $1.5 million, and you can't buy a lot of companies for $1 million, $1.5 million. So we actually went out to the market and said, we probably need to do a transaction as well and go after and get some capital to be able to do some acquisitions and some branding as well.
About how many people did you have at that point, or how big was your organization when you were in that process?
In that process, we were about 60 people when we started going through it. Now we have over 200. So this is in the 2016, 2017 timeframe as we started looking at it. For us, it was early 2017. And we finished 2017 with about 100 people. So we were, continuing to grow, but we were in this 50 to 60 person still as a founder. A lot of founders are responsible either for technology or revenue. I was responsible for the sales and marketing efforts. And that proved to be a challenge as you start going through a round.
So really you hit a ceiling of what you could do with your current capital base and infrastructure. And so, growth is obviously relative. So in an absolute sense, at what level were they when they took their investment from Carlyle?
They took their investment from Carlyle when we were projected to be about $55 million. We were going through our first round that didn't close. We'll discuss maybe a little bit later, but we were projecting $21 million during that time.
Which I should say, kudos for growing a company without investment to $21 million a year in that space in that time. That's amazing. You can see why you earned that investment coming out the backside. So well done there.
Thank you.
So you just briefly alluded to a first attempt that didn't work out as expected. Can you walk us through that?
It was a great learning experience. We hired an investment banking firm. They came in and looked at our books records, our sales and marketing efforts, and they put together a very glossy book about why the security space is growing, why cybersecurity and risk are growing marketplaces, what the total addressable market it was. I didn't know what TAM was really until going through this process, but those are things that figure into it. And we went through the process. And as we were going through, we garnered a lot of interest. I think our teaser went out to 120 different buyers, both financial buyers, PE firms, and strategic buyers. They signed 78 NDAs, and we got 20 indication of interest and one letter of intent. Then due diligence starts. That's where the real process is. And that's something for us. I didn't open up the kimono too much to the rest of the organization, let them know what was going on. I didn't want them to be concerned. So we had about 3 people that knew that there was something in the works. And I had to sort of run due diligence. And as I mentioned before, still running sales and marketing
Mhm.
at that same time. And I really underestimated how much time due diligence was going to take. And we went under LOI in March of 2017. And in April of 2017, we didn't make our sales numbers that I had planned. Well, that's because as the main sales guy of the organization, I'm focused on a due diligence rather than sales.
Right. So that was their pushback. Then they came back and said that this is all great, but we're based off these projections that aren't happening.
Exactly. So we got to mid-May, we had a purchase agreement.
Hmm.
We were getting ready to close. My wife and I even booked our flights to go to California to sign the papers. Memorial Day weekend, we were going to have a great time and sign the paperwork and have a partner to go with. And the numbers for April were a little soft because of that. And they were concerned about the scalability of the business given how much we were involved in the day-to-day operations. And that was a concern that came up. And about 7 days before closing, they said, hey, we don't know if this asset's as valuable as we thought. And I said, well, we're really not selling black and white TVs. We're in the cybersecurity space. It's a growing market. And so why don't we get our act together and then come back around again?
Did they come back and try to renegotiate the valuation, or were they just saying no at that point?
They tried to renegotiate the valuation. And I said, maybe we should do things better first and then come back around to get the most valuation possible or the best valuation possible.
Got it. And so first I want to ask before we move on to the next phase of that, how much did you use the Carlyle investment in the other firm? How much, to reuse your analogy, that how much track did that clear for you, that another firm in the space? Did you use that as to the fear of missing out kind of thing? How did you market that?
That's a great point. I think we did a poor job of marketing that. We knew what a transaction was that was similar. We knew what their margins were compared to ours. And because we at deep down, we're a tech-enabled professional services firm, we're using people to look at cybersecurity risks at this point, not as much of, AI or machine learning, that it really hinges on the people. And so we knew our people were good, but we needed to beef up processes. We needed to beef up going through a financial audit, which we hadn't done before. We needed to have a strong CFO. And then I looked at myself internally and said, you can't control everything anymore, Scott.
Right.
You're at this scale. We need to go out and get somebody whose job is to be the chief revenue officer and in charge of sales for the organization.
Do you think that there was a disconnect? Because that makes sense. It is really about the people. This is an ever-changing industry, and the right people keep you in front of the threats. Do you feel like you had potentially the wrong investor because they didn't understand that and they were so focused on just sales numbers in a month?
I think it was maybe the wrong type of investor. You hear about investors that are growth investors and they're focused on growth and not as concerned about net income. At the end of the day, they realize net income and growth chews up this net income and capital. And our current partner that we'll go through and I'm sure talk about FTV Capital, they're truly a growth investor. Our prior investor and a lot of other investors we were speaking to during the processes were very focused on the net income of the company now and what was it last year and what's it projected to be next year. Whereas FTV's focus was, where is it going to be in the next 5 years? And let's build a roadmap that gets us there, knowing it may not be there right now between years 1 and 3.
Right. And so at that point, then, when you said, I don't want to renegotiate the valuation, or you could see the road ahead for you, they obviously, potentially because they weren't the right type of investor, couldn't. And so when you decided to make that cut, well, let's start with, tell me, as much as I hate to make you relive it, but what did you feel exactly when you just said, I got to break away from this?
I get tingles even thinking about it now. I felt relief. The due diligence process was so hard that first time around because we weren't prepared. As a founder, you want to make sure you are choosing the right partner.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is like, it's a marriage. I'm becoming your partner now, and we're going to be partners together going forward. And I've only known you for really 60 days of a due diligence process.
Right.
And so I felt relief in not saying that they were a bad partner, but maybe just not the right partner for our firm, which is different than the second time around.
Got it. Was it relief mixed with optimism because you knew that now you had your head around the process, you knew what your, what you wanted in a partner and potentially a path to making the due diligence process work even better for you going forward?
I think I couldn't have said any better. I think, as we go around assessing people's IT security systems and everything else and telling them what's wrong, somebody came into my business and says, here's everything that's wrong. And I learned a ton from it. There's a quality of earnings report that goes through your earnings, and are these sales? You may get cash in the door, but what are gap sales? What's accounting based sales that you had? And we went through and learned that entire process, which was wonderful for us to know. We learned personnel holes that we had. And we sort of created almost like when you're building a house, there's a punch list of 10 things wrong in the house that you work with the builder on. We created our punch list of 10 items and just attacked them as a sole focus over the next 90 days.
And what was the time between the goodbye to the California firm and the start again of the process?
We looked at the end of May is when the first process broke down. We really spent June through September as getting our act together of some of the holes that we had. And then we went back out to the marketplace in early 2018. So call it mid January of 2018. We started going back out again.
And how much of that go back was back to the original firms from the first time around? Did you make a completely new packet? And how did your ask change, I guess?
We went out to, I should say, for the most part, entirely new firms. One of the things that I learned as we went through the process, and again, as you said, it was our first round at 54.5 million. I hadn't been through a seed round or others to know there's different firms you talk to at different sizes. So our valuation between 2017 and 2018, when we did between the two transactions, actually doubled. And so when you look at that, a whole new group of firms come out open to you. And so as we saw us move up the size spectrum and enterprise value, there was a new group of firms that probably the first time said we were too small. Now we were the right size for them.
So you started with a new group of firms, and then what was the feedback? You'd mentioned the first time you got X number of letters of interest and so on and so forth.
So the second time around, I really looked at the criteria of what we wanted as a partner and said, instead of the let's go out to the masses approach, let's figure out the 5 to 8 firms that are in our sweet spot, that are growth equity firms that understand technology, understand professional services as well, and are maybe, if you want to have a PE firm that's focused on SaaS, that's what you should go to. If you want one that says we understand professional services and tech-enabled services, we should go there. And so we went out to approximately 5 to 8 firms. At the same time, we went back out to 5 different investment bankers. So we didn't know whether or not we were going to use a banker, sort of like use a real estate agent to sell your house, or whether we were going to sell our house on our own. And we wanted to understand, did the cleanup we do, did it work? Did we do everything, or were there additional holes? And so we went through investment bankers and interviewed different investment bankers to see maybe we need to go through that process because maybe we do need an agent for this transaction. We went through it though, and we ended up not choosing a banker. I was very transparent with the PE firms I was speaking to, that I was speaking to the investment banking firms. And I was very transparent to the investment banking firms that I was speaking to these PE firms. And if either group got sideways, I was going to go one direction or the other. We ended up, like I said, not using an investment banking firm. That wasn't because the investment bankers got squirrely at all. It was the fact that it kept the PE firms honest for us. And that was extremely helpful as we went through that. Very time consuming. And so we built up the infrastructure in place where I could spend the time looking at identifying a great partner for this second run of an organization. We're celebrating our 10 years of business. So let's find a partner for the next 5 to 10 years that we want to work with as well.
So a lot of times when investors are looking at potential investments, use of funds is a big piece of the puzzle. You mentioned the competitor used a big chunk of their money to buy and ingest a firm. So what were your intended uses of funds, and how did that impact your negotiations with the investors?
It's interesting when I started my pitch to the firms of what we wanted to do with the funds in New York, I had 4 meetings set up during the day. My breakfast meeting pitch and my dinner meeting pitch were very different. And we had one of our advisory board members with us. And by the dinner pitch, he said, man, you got this down pat. Because the morning pitch, I was stumbling around a little bit about it. And I reflected back on, what do we want to do? We want to invest in our brand. We're very targeted with our marketing where we look for ROI. And sometimes brand marketing is harder to tie to a specific ROI. And we never had the capital to make a big splash at a conference or something like that. We couldn't have afforded to sponsor Synapse like where you and I met. It was like prior to the equity deal. That was not something that we do from a branding perspective. So brand marketing was a very large use of our funds. We wanted to have a target for acquisitions, as I was speaking about. There are a lot of great assets in our space that are either a tenth of our size or either equal to our size to go after as well. And so we want to look at acquisitions and have some dry powder for that as well. We wanted to have some expansion, both in the US and abroad. Since the transaction, we've opened up operations in the UK. We've signed some partnership agreements in Australia. And then we actually have moved some of our employees down to Latin America as well. All things, again, that we wanted to do with the dollars. Additionally, being a bootstrap company, you only hire resources as you need them. You move into an office, you get furniture when you need the furniture. Same thing from our perspective. We would hire somebody when we exactly needed that person. Instead of, let's anticipate what the needs might be, hire them, train them, let them learn our ways, and then be ready to go out with solid methodologies. So hiring people ahead of actually needing them in the field was it. And our last piece really was our application. We have an application that allows us to perform our security audits in a more efficient manner. We previously had bootstrapped that with offshore programming and business analysts out of college and things of that nature. And that has allowed us to invest, seven figures into our application this year on development of it. And so that was a big deal for us, as you said, use of funds, developing a roadmap and pitching that to investors of where their funds are going to go was extremely important.
And when you look at acquisitions, were they mainly for customer acquisition, or are you also bringing in different skill sets or different bits of value to add to the platform?
A couple things that the way we're looking at it is customer acquisition, increase revenue, personnel, where maybe there's underutilized personnel because in the cybersecurity market, there's not that many. There's negative unemployment. For every 100 jobs, they say there's 75 qualified people. So our job is to try to identify some assets where maybe they're not fully utilizing their resources, and we can do that. And the other side of it is we hired from TriBridge was a great exit here in the Tampa Bay area to DXC. We hired one of their senior partnership and alliance people to come into our firm, and he's EVP of corporate development, and his job is to identify partnerships in the cyber ecosystem that makes sense for us to partner with that eventually are probably going to be acquisitions for us as well.
I'd be remiss if I didn't go back and give a little time to your marketing, because before you received the investment, you still bootstrapped a company to 20 some million dollars. What was your marketing philosophy to grow the services revenue to that point without the investment?
Our approach was to put our name in front of buyers when they were ready to make a buying decision about the specific services they were looking for. So whether that was some type of paid advertising from a search perspective, LinkedIn, display ad advertising, we were looking to try to make sure when people raised their hand that they had a question about the service, that our name was in front of them.
And which one of those avenues worked the best for you?
It's people obviously searching on the web. So whether it's Google or Yahoo or those types of things, that's really where we saw a lot of value in growing the organization. Now we've branched into things such as LinkedIn and even moving into Facebook advertising.
So did you have a robust content marketing? Were you putting out white papers and putting out articles and blogs and things like that?
Exactly. So we looked at it, we cut it out sort of as top of funnel, middle of funnel, and bottom of funnel content. So the educational content that someone might be looking at because they just heard the fact that they may need to have this type of information security audit, or this new regulation came out that, a sales guy heard it, or a sales lady heard at a meeting, hey, I'm concerned about this type of regulation. And they went and Googled it, and we gave them top of funnel content such as a white paper or a blog. And then as they move down the funnel, have more targeted content about how the process works.
Wonderful. And what's the R&D, for lack of a better word, to call it strategy at A-LIGN? Obviously, this is an ever-changing subject. And so how do you stay in front of the bad guys?
So a couple different ways. We actually, one of our 4 values is innovate constantly, because the bad guys are getting smarter. The good guys have to get smarter. We actually have Gene Geiger, a president of our organization. He focuses on new services as well as technology side of it. So that's extremely important for us. Additionally, a hire that we made after the investment was a learning and development manager. We need to have an innovate constantly, be in value. We should have a learning manager. And so we reorganized the business to create practice leads for each one of our services that are monitoring their individual service, as well as the ancillary services that affect it. Again, things prior to the transaction, we couldn't do because everyone needed to be focused on revenue, and there was no practice lead. Your job was 100% to service a client and 20% to stay on top of the changes, versus now we have practice leads who 100% of their job is to stay on top of content and the new changes.
So let's turn to the capital ecosystem in Tampa Bay. Obviously, it sounded like you were jumping outside the area almost immediately, and you ended up with FTV, I think, who have offices on the West Coast in New York.
Correct.
So, what experience did you have with potential capital partners here? And do you have any observations on the capital environment in Tampa Bay?
I think the capital environment in the Tampa area is obviously up and coming. It's a younger environment for us to be in. I spoke with a lot of firms that were very qualified in quality, but again, as I talked about the size of the investments, they do great jobs with $3 million to $10 million investments, and they're looking for minority interest in the organization. For us, we went after and said, we want to have someone who gets a majority interest. We want someone committed to our company. And so the check size had to be larger. But in the Tampa Bay area, there are these firms. And as I always say, the small fish are here and they're going to attract the bigger fish to come here as well to see why are people investing in here. Maybe I should actually have somebody right here in their own backyard. So we found great firms sort of in the $3 to $10 million investment range that were very interested in our organization. For us, it wasn't the right size for our partner. We wanted someone with global reach as we continue to grow the company global. Our main competitor, like we had mentioned, had a Carlyle. So that's why we wanted to have a larger fund behind us.
And what's next for A-LIGN? Do you see another round in your future, or are you good to go?
There's a lot of money on the sidelines. There's a lot of attractive organizations to look to acquire. There are good assets out in the marketplace. As you look at valuations of companies, maybe they're slowing down a little bit in certain areas with the hesitation in the market and in some of the downturn in the market. But with the amount of dollars on the sidelines and as I continue to be exposed to more and more companies, I see how good of an organization we are from a growth and an EBITDA perspective. So there are going to be more things coming from us. We're even looking at going after and chewing off a little bit bigger fish than us possibly as well, and getting some upstream resources. So it's exciting. And it's things that prior to this transaction, I was never exposed to. And I think that's the thing in the Tampa Bay area. We're seeing more and more transactions happen, and the exposure is going to be greater for our founders.
It's fantastic. It's a great place to be.
Yes.
Well done.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me.